Hi, today I'm going to be demonstrating our UrbanCode Release integration with XL Deploy. First thing you're going to want to do to get the XL Deploy plugin is go to developer.ibm.com/urbancode/plugins. And then you can navigate to this UrbanCode Release tab to see all the UrbanCode Release plugins. At the very bottom, one of the newest plugins should be XL Deploy. So if you click in here, you'll see the download links. You can download the plugin, go into your UrbanCode Release server in the Integrations tab, and then upload the new plugin in here. So what this demonstration is going to cover is how to set up an integration with XL Deploy in UrbanCode Release. I'm going to explain all the different properties that are involved in doing that, what they all mean and what they all do, and what you're going to need to be concerned with. Next, I'm going to actually run the import of all of my XL Deploy applications, environments, and packages from an example XL Deploy server that I set up just for this demonstration into my UrbanCode Release instance. After that, I'm going to create a new version of one of the applications that I imported in UrbanCode Release inside of XL Deploy, rerun the integration, it will import that new version, and then I will run the deployment task from UrbanCode Release to actually deploy the new version in XL Deploy. And then lastly, what I'm going to do in the demonstration is I'm going to remove that new version that I created in XL Deploy, rerun the integration, and it will detect that version has been deleted and delete it from UrbanCode Release, and then redeploy the previous version of my application, essentially doing somewhat of a rollback feature. So first, to configure the integration, we're going to go over the integrations page. And I've already gone ahead and done this, but I'm going to explain all the properties that you would need to configure. So basically, when you create a new integration, just add an integration, give it a name, choose the type. For this one will be XL Deploy. And these types are based on the plugins that are currently installed. So for this first property here, this XL Deploy URL, this is just going to be your host name and port to your XL Deploy server. Mine is hosted on port 4516, and I have a Docker container running with this host name here. So the next property, these credentials for the XL Deploy user, this is basically your functional user that you're going to use to import XL Deploy configuration objects, or configuration items as they're called in XL Deploy. This user just basically needs read permissions on those objects. I haven't configured any permissions on my XL Deploy server, but if you have this user would just need to be able to read the configuration items. And this next property here is the full sync interval. So what this is this determines between whether the integration is going to run as a full sync or a delta sync. Normally when the integration runs, say if you set it to run every 1 minute, for instance, it's going to be a delta sync. So what that means is it's only going to import everything that has changed since the last time this integration ran. So the opposite of that, a full sync, it's going to try and import everything. And the point of that is because when you run a delta sync, it's not going to actually detect items in XL Deploy that have been deleted. So to do that, what we have to do is we have to check everything in XL Deploy and everything in UrbanCode Release, compare them against each other, and see what's actually been removed from XL Deploy. And as you can understand, that's kind of an intensive process, and it can take a little bit longer. So that's why we provide this interval, so we can say, okay, only run a full sync every 24 hours, so that every other time the sync runs, it's going to be a delta sync. It's only going to import items that have changed. And then, of course, the very first time you run the plugin in a new environment, it's always going to be a full sync. It's going to import everything. So then after, right, so I think that fully explains the full sync interval. We've added this check authentication box, which you can click to confirm that these credentials are valid. So once you check it, it'll make sure that you can authenticate with the XL Deploy server, and also make sure that you can authenticate with the UrbanCode Release server. And then the last property that you can configure here is this log4j logging level. So what this does is the plugin is configured to print output statements using log4j. So many Java dependencies, including the ones we use in the plugin, use log4j to print debugging statements and informational statements. So for instance, in this plugin, we're using an Apache dependency to actually make the HTTP calls from UrbanCode Release to XL Deploy to find what needs to be imported and to import them and things like that. So Apache will actually print debug statements using log4j saying, okay, what URL are we hitting? What data are we sending to that URL? What's the payload that's being returned? So if we open this up and actually turned on that debug logging, we would get all of that information from the Apache dependency. So this is really useful if you want to, if you're running into some kind of a problem and you're not really sure why. Maybe it's one of these HTTP calls that are being made. You can see the endpoint that's being hit, the data that's being returned, and kind of try and figure out what's going wrong for yourself. But for this demonstration, we're just going to run the informational logging level. So I'm going to briefly show you my XL Deploy server here. This is just an example server that I set up with a few applications, a few environments, 2 environments, 3 applications. I have a package that I've already created that's going to be used to deploy. And this is the main application that I'm going to be showing off during this demonstration, this Spring Music. This was a sample Gradle application that the Cloud Foundry GitHub organization provides for free. So I just downloaded and built the jar file. So what we're going to do is next we're going to import all of these objects into UrbanCode Release. So if we go back to UrbanCode Release, I've already ran this integration a few times, so just to show it importing everything, I'm going to set my full sync interval to 0. And that's something I should also mention, that if you always want to run a full sync, maybe if you want it to always detect items that have been deleted from XL Deploy, no matter the performance hit, you can just set it to 0 so that it will run every time. And in contrast, if you never want it to run a full sync, you can set it to -1. And this is all explained in this description here. So I'm going to set it to 0 and run my integration. And we're going to take a look at the output log that UrbanCode Release returns us after the integration's finished running. So as we can see here, I've imported 3 applications, 6 application environments or application targets, 3 versions. These are those packages that I showed you in XL Deploy, and then 1 inventory entry. This is an application that's already been deployed to an environment in XL Deploy. XL Deploy refers to them as deployed applications. Now, one thing you'll notice about this is that if you remember in XL Deploy, I only had 2 environments, right? But I had 3 applications. So why then should I have 6 application environments? The reason is because in XL Deploy, when I actually go to deploy one of these packages, every single environment is a potential target. So what this means in release is that each application that's created needs to have all possible environments as a target. So that would mean I have 2 for Spring Music, 2 for Pet Store War, and 2 for Hello World. So that when you run the deployment, you can choose any of the targets. So next thing I'm going to do, now that we've imported our applications, I'll briefly show you the applications that have been imported in here. We have Hello World, Pet Store Wars, Spring Music. I'm going to delve into this Spring Music, and you can see I've already deployed a version using UCR. This is one version that's been imported. This is version 1.0.0. That's the package that I showed you right here. So this deployment package is 1.0.0. And if we look at the pipeline view of my release, you can see in this dev instance I have 100. And before I go on any further, I want to mention that to set up everything you're going to need to run the deployments, you're going to have to set up a release in UrbanCode Release and add the given applications to that release. And for a real good tutorial on doing that, the basics of that, you can go to the IBM Knowledge Center, because I'm not going to cover all that in extreme detail. So you can go into the IBM Knowledge Center in here, just Google for IBM Knowledge Center, find the UrbanCode Release product. And the best tutorial in here is, let's just select the version, integrating, just search for integrating with UrbanCode Deploy. This provides a really in-depth tutorial of how to set up those releases and everything that I've already gone ahead and done to save time in this video. So the first thing you'll see here is associating the environments. So what you have to do is when those environments are pulled in from XL Deploy, they'll be created as application targets, and you'll need to add those into release environments as this document explains here. So that's something I've already done, so we'll move on from there. You'll need to create a release, and you're going to have to add the application to that release. So for me, I just named my release Spring Music, and I added the Spring Music application to that release, just to keep it very simple. And you'll just follow along with the guide, just so you don't miss anything. A couple other things you're going to have to do is configure your default plan. So this is going to be where we're going to pick up. We're going to pick up the demonstration video here. So you'll configure the default plan to say what tasks are going to run when you deploy something with this release. So if we take a look in my UrbanCode Release server, I have this Spring Music release that I created that I explained to you. Has all of that. So the deployment plans for the Spring Music release, I just set up the default plan. And all we're going to do is you're just going to run one task. So this task is something that was actually imported when we ran the integration. Deploy Spring Music. It's just an execution task, and this is going to run the deployment in XL Deploy. So I've already done that with the version 1.0. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new version and actually deploy that. But just so you can kind of see what happened after I deployed 1.0, the very first version, you'll see it updated the environment that I deployed it in. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new version of Spring Music. So for this, just to kind of show you, I have Spring Music pulled down. I'm going to update the Gradle build. Oh, I'm sorry. The build Gradle file. Well, all we'll do is just simply change this version to make a version 1.0.1. We'll save that. Run the clean and assemble. This will clean out that old version from the build directory and create the new one. So we'll just make sure it's in there in build libs. Okay, so next what we're going to do, and this isn't really part of the UrbanCode Release portion of the demo. This is just to show you how you would actually deploy something using XL Deploy. And I'm doing a very simple demonstration of just using a local file system. This is the file system that the XL Deploy server is running on, and I'm going to deploy a jar file into a directory. So for my Spring Music application, I'm going to create a new deployment package. I will call it 1.0.1 to keep with the naming convention that I had before. Save it. And now I need to add a new file, because I'm just deploying a file, like I said in here. This is an archive, it's a jar file. So I will name it similar to the other one, Spring Music 1.0.1.jar. Okay, so let's first upload it, and I'm already navigated to the directory, so let's upload Spring Music 101. The target path, we'll make it opt Spring Music, and this will be where it deploys on the XL deploy server, because that's just what I'm doing. I'm just copying it from the directory that's uploaded into my server, which is this local host infrastructure. And this is something that UCR doesn't really need to be concerned with. This is just the deployment logic on XL deploy itself. And I can, just in case that directory doesn't exist, I'm pretty sure I typed it in right, but I can create target path in there. So we'll save that. Okay, now we have a new version in XL deploy. So normally when you set up your integration, you set it to run in some type of an interval. So I have mine set up as a manual update, but if you wanted it to run every single minute, it would have detected that change. But for me, I'm manually running this, so, and I have my sync interval set to 24 hours. So since I already ran this, when I run my integration now, it's just going to run a delta sync. So what it will do is it will detect that all I did was I added a new version. So we'll see that in the logs here. So we see the version imported, and since the application was modified, it's in XL deploy that counts as the application being modified, so it just re-imports that application and the version associated with that application. So now we'll see that we have under Spring Music, we have a 1.0.1. So the last, second to last thing we're going to do is we're going to deploy 1.0.1 in our release. We'll go into deployments, we'll create a new one, select that Spring Music, the dev phase. We'll just use the default plan because that's the one I've configured. You can make a new plan if you want to configure something more specific. But for me, I'm just running the deployment task for the Spring Music application under the default plan. So we'll save this. Go into the config applications and versions. And this time we'll just add the 1.0.1. This is the latest one that's been deployed. So now when we start the deployment, pretty soon there will be some comments posted on this execution task here that we can read. So not yet. So we see that the task is being executed in XL deploy right now. When this task in UCR is actually going to be updated once the integration runs again in UrbanCode Release. So when the integration runs, it will check for any currently running execution tasks in UCR, and then check if those corresponding tasks in XL deploy are completed. So if we look at XL deploy, we see it's pretty obvious that it's completed because version 1.0.1 is now in dev. We can check the tasks here. We see this April 2nd, which is today, we ran a deployment. So now what should happen in UCR, if we go into our integrations, the next time this integration were to run, and we're just going to run it manually again, because just for the demonstration purposes, I'm running it manually to control when I show you everything. So we can see all that's changed is one inventory entry has been modified. So what that means is if we go into our pipeline view, look at our Spring Music release, we can now see that in dev, version 1.0.1 is there. So similarly, if you look at the application, Spring Music application, the latest version in dev is 1.0.1. Okay, so the very last thing we're going to do is we're going to remove version 1.0.1 from XL-Deploy to kind of show you the point of that full sync feature. So there's a couple ways you could do this. There's kind of a destructive way you can do it, where you just go here and delete this version. You can also run what's called an undeploy task. So if you go well, the XL-Deploy has some undeploy feature. We're not going to really use it in this demonstration. What I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to remove this version from the dev environment. Just completely remove it. Remove version 1.0.1. Delete. Oh, first thing you have to delete it from the infrastructure. And if you want information on the undeploy task, look at some XL-Deploy documentation. This video is not really to give a tutorial on XL-Deploy itself. It's more for UrbanCode Release. So then last thing I'll do is delete the version completely of 1.0.1 of Spring Music. So I'll go into my XL-Deploy server to actually delete the version. Misspelled. So this is what I've actually been doing with my XL-Deploy deployment task. I just copying the jar file into Spring Music. So just as a very brash way of destroying everything, destroy all the evidence, just delete everything. So this is just to show you that no matter how you go about deleting a version from XL-Deploy, UCR can detect that. So now that I've fully deleted everything, my XL-Deploy, I don't have version 1.0.0 anymore. I don't even have the jar file deployed to the server. So in UrbanCode Release, we'll go through and run a full sync. So when you run a full sync, as I've mentioned before, you're checking what's actually been deleted from XL-Deploy. So now we'll run full sync. We should find that we've deleted one new version. Yep, so we've deleted this version here. So we'll check just to make sure the versions of our application. So we have Spring Music. Now we only have 1.0.0. So the last thing we're going to do is just redeploy that. So let's go into our deployments, create a new one, new Spring Music, the dev phase, in here. Alright, so we're going to add the old version. So this is kind of like a sort of like a rollback. We do 1.0.0, save it, and actually start this deployment execution. So that sometimes this takes a minute to actually get started. So we can kind of keep checking on this. Depending on how long it takes, I might cut this and come back in a second. Oh, never mind, it's already starting. So we see, it's waiting to be closed. So the next time the integration runs, it will check if the task in XL-Deploy completed. I mean, we can check that ourselves briefly if I just refresh the server. So now I see in my dev environment I have Spring Music 1.0.0 again in the inventory. And if we were looking through the deployment task, which I'm not going to do again, we'd find that one that already executed. So now lastly, let's just make sure our integration runs to close out the task. So we'll just keep it the default full sync interval that I've configured. Okay, and the only thing that's been updated is our inventory. So that should mean that in our pipeline view, we now have the old version of Spring Music. We have 1.0.0. Okay, so I hope this demonstration has been helpful. And we definitely welcome any feedback you have, anything you want us to add to the to the plugin that would be helpful. So yeah, we look forward to hearing your feedback. So please, go download the plugin, try it out, let us know what you think. Thank you very much.